Happy Thanksgiving, and as the holiday season began, I'm Armstrong Williams. Joe Griffith is a research fellow, financial regulations at the Heritage Foundation. Joe, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thank you for having me today, Armstrong.
Thank you so much for joining us. You know, we're actually, during this holiday season, looking for some kind of hope, some kind of silver lining for everyday Americans, that the economy is going to get better, inflation may finally get under control, and that they may have something to look for in the 2024 at the gas pump and the grocery stores and the things that really impact their economy. Is there anything that you can look towards that you may share with them that could give them some kind of hope that things are going to get better?
Well, I can give you the glimmer of good news, and that's that oil prices have actually dropped by about 20% over the past month and a half. Now, the bad news on that, it's that oil prices are dropping not because we're producing more, but because demand is down. That's because economic growth really is sluggish right now. And so I wish I could give you more good news, but that's the best of it, Armstrong. Families are still going to be struggling with the accumulated impacts of the high inflation that we experienced over the past 3 years. And once again, even though the good news is that the inflation rate has come down, that does nothing to diminish the gap between the price hikes and the very stagnant wages that we've experienced since early 2021.
What about the job? We hear all these numbers about the job market. There's a plethora of jobs, that jobs are being created. Just because jobs are being created doesn't necessarily mean that people have the skills to take advantage of those jobs. Is there any good news or anything that can give you hope as it relates to these what tends to be continuing upticks in the job market?
Well, once again, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that we are seeing jobs created. But the bad news is that over the last 6 months, we've actually seen a decline in the number of full-time jobs. And what that suggests is that the entirety of the increase in jobs right now over the past half a year has been because more people are working multiple jobs. And they're working multiple jobs because we've seen real wages decline by about $5,000 annually over the past few years. So a lot of folks are finding it necessary, despite their family obligations and social obligations, they're finding it necessary to pick up part-time work just to make ends meet.
Talk about just how the economy of the average American family has changed over the last 2 years.
Oh, it has been dramatic. We have seen, in addition to that pay cut, we've seen savings rates dip to near all-time lows. The savings rate right now is around 3% for American families. And at the same time, we've seen credit card debt explode. We just hit a new all-time record, $1.1 trillion in credit card debt. And what that means is that the typical family has added $3,000 in credit card debt over the past 2.5 years. And if you combine that increase in credit card balances with the dramatic increase in the interest rates on credit card accounts, you see typical families spending another $1,000 a year on interest payments on their credit card debt. It's been an absolute disaster for families. And at the same time, we've seen housing prices increase as far as the mortgage costs. And most families are finding if they're starting out, they can't even afford to move out of a rental unit into their own private residence.
But are you also implying that many of these families have no choice but to spend on their credit cards? They have no other options?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of times in the past, people would put on debt onto their credit cards for frivolous living. That is not what we're seeing right now. We're seeing people add to their credit card balances just to pay their rental payments, just to make their auto payments, and just to buy groceries.
You know, some people argue that higher rates for longer can be good news for the economy. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, interest rates, like any other, are like any other product. It's a price on the cost of capital. And when you see interest rates rising, that means it's tougher to live. It's tougher to grow your business. But when we think about these interest rates, we need to realize that we as private consumers or business owners, we're competing with our own government for the very limited amount of capital that's available for those loans. And right now, you see our government spending upwards of $1 trillion a year in borrowed money. And I want to break that down per family again. The deficit this year is requiring our federal government to borrow more than $10,000 per family of four. Every $10,000 that government is spending, they're competing with us for a limited amount of resources. That means the government bids up interest rates on that capital, and we have to compete with our own federal government.
So let me raise this issue with you. I know we often harp on the success and those that achieve achievement in our society, but you also see young people and adults create wealth and opportunity at an unprecedented manner. How are they able to take advantage of what should be a sluggish economy where you find many people suffering, but you still find people who thrive, creating new businesses, creating new opportunities? What sets them apart?
What sets them apart is the willingness to actually sacrifice to achieve those long-term dreams. And of course, we've got some strong economic headwinds, and it's more difficult. But you see a lot of these entrepreneurs, they're working multiple jobs. Some of them are building their own businesses while working as an employee, and they're doing that in the hopes that those efforts will pay off. And one thing of encouragement on this is that conservatives, free market supporters in Congress did block a proposal that would have made it far more difficult for people to actually work those gig jobs that make it possible to start their own businesses. We saw efforts to classify everything from Uber and Lyft drivers to independent contractors as employees, and that would have made it much more difficult for people to actually get their own private businesses off the ground.
But how do we encourage more people to take the risk and be less risk averse? How do we explain to people that there are opportunities to be had, just waiting with someone who's willing to make the sacrifice, willing to risk it all, to have it all? Because that's really the American way. Because while we may sit and talk about families that are struggling, and that is a overwhelming number of Americans, but there's still Americans that find opportunity in this, not only in this sluggish economy, but all economies of the past.
Well, look, part of this actually requires educating younger adults about the opportunities that do exist and how to actually obtain the capital that's necessary to get those ideas off the ground. And unfortunately, you have a lot of folks that go through public schools and even through college without really gaining an understanding of how to acquire wealth, how to manage their personal finances, and how to actually use the wealth of others, whether it's a bank or an investor or the Small Business Administration, to actually get their ideas off the ground. That's a big part of the reason why you do see a lot of individuals who have family members or close friends that have made it with their own private businesses. You see them more likely to take those chances, and that's because they've been able to learn from others. And for those of us who haven't had that opportunity, I think it's important for the high schools and for colleges to actually equip people with the basic knowledge of how to move those ideas forward and earn a living off of it.
That brings us to a critical point, is what happens when the classroom fails these kids when they don't require real skills, real self-esteem, real self-worth. They're passed along. They don't earn the grade. And sometimes they graduate with no proficiency in English, math, and reading. Talk about how that plays out for them in the long run in this economy, and just how crippling that can be.
Well, some of the worst performing school districts in this country are graduating seniors that are functionally illiterate. In some cases, 1 in 5 graduates can be functionally illiterate. It is almost impossible to get ahead if you don't have the ability to read and to absorb information for yourself. And that's supposed to be the purpose of education, is not just giving us knowledge, it's actually teaching us how to obtain knowledge for ourselves. And unfortunately, schools have been less focused on academics, more focused on ideology. And kids are just not graduating with those resources. I'm very encouraged that a number of states, including Arizona and Iowa and also Florida, are moving forward with programs that allow children school choice. so that if you are, and let's say you're in a middle class or lower middle class family, or you're not happy with that neighborhood school because they're not teaching academics, this is equipping parents of modest means with the possibility of giving their children a quality education to equip them to succeed.
Why are these hot new jobs good for the economy but bad for the marketplace?
A lot of the hot new jobs, especially in the AI industry and other forms of technological development, those will result in a lot more productivity for our workforce overall. So it's not just the new jobs in those fields, and those can be very well paying. We also have to look at the benefit that it brings in terms of total efficiency in the marketplace. The only way that typical middle-class families can do better over time as a whole is if that each hour of work results in more output. It's called productivity. Now, for years, we saw productivity increase at 2, 3, 4% per year. And that's why middle-class families today are far better off than they were 40 years ago. But what we've seen as of late is a decline in productivity. Last year, we actually saw a record decline in productivity. That does not bode well for the future. Now, I understand there are concerns that specific businesses, industries, and jobs might be negatively impacted by some of this new technology. But we need to also look at that big picture. And yes, anytime you have new technology developed, there are going to be some existing jobs and professions that are going to be harmed, sometimes permanently. But overall, that results in a stronger economy and in a better off middle class.
You know, Joel, it's always a pleasure to have you on, especially during the holidays. We wish you well. We always enjoy your perspective and the experience that you bring unapologetically to our broadcast platform. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity, Armstrong.
When we return, we're going to turn to medicine, and Dr. Bryan Donohue, our residential physician, will be joining us to talk about the latest breakthroughs. I'm Armstrong Williams. Dr. Donohue, welcome back to the broadcast. You know, it is the holidays and we're looking for good news, but what happens, is it possible when you get COVID and the flu at the same time?
Yeah, it is possible, Armstrong. It turns out, on the other hand, that usually what happens is when you get one viral illness, you make antibodies prodigiously, meaning lots and lots of antibodies, which tends to provide you with some degree of protection against other viruses. So usually there's about a 2 to 4 week time frame after you get one sort of a viral illness when you're to some extent protected against getting other viruses. On the other hand, there's something called super infection. If you're a little bit more immune fragile, maybe not as robust as you'd like to be, it is true that just like punches in the bar fight, the first punch that lands makes the second punch both harder to tolerate and more likely to occur. So for some more fragile patients, that protective effect is really less obliging, and an enhanced risk is the more usual scenario.
Why are so many people on postpartum depression drugs, and why are these drugs skyrocketing?
Armstrong, it's such a good question for us here on Thanksgiving, thinking about all that we have to be grateful for. One of the things, though, that does happen, and it's been observed since the 1950s, this is for all our moms watching this morning, you know, after we give birth, it's very common, you could almost say it's expected that there is a change in affect. That means in your inner life. And the reason for that has to do with shifts in the blood supply to the brain. So over the last few weeks of pregnancy, there's this great expansion of blood volume, getting ready for the birthing process and the placental bleed and so forth. And so after we have that birth, it turns out that the blood supply to the brain may not for a short time be as robust as it was, particularly during those last few weeks of pregnancy. So people can get a little bit of an endocrine shift that relates to that altered blood supply that causes a little bit of an affective disorder, a little bit of depression. And, we should be aware of that. We see it also, by the way, Armstrong, after bypass surgery, something called pump head. So people very commonly, we actually published the first paper in the literature on this, people pretty routinely get a little sad after a victorious procedure. And if we just counsel people and say, look, kind of go with that, just take it as it comes and not feel quite so obliged to quickly resort to medications. And if you think about it, Armstrong, once you find yourself on an antidepressant, you're likely to stay on the antidepressant. So we want to be a little bit, just a little bit more reflective in initiating those therapies from the get-go.
Talk about the heart attack that no one see coming.
Well, that is the topic of the ages. Here's the way that works. In America now, Armstrong, there are 350,000 people a year who die of sudden cardiac death. And as we've fixed almost everything else, if I may, in vascular biology, this one number keeps staring at us from the page. We've made essentially no dent in it. Why would that be? Because these were not people who were on our grid. They're people who didn't know that they had any vascular disease. And here's the really interesting piece about this, Armstrong. It turns out that if you look carefully at that group of people with sudden cardiac death, about 70% of those people have a 50% or less blockage in the artery. Think that through for a second. So how would they feel? Fine. What would their stress test look like? Normal. So the detection method, even if we happen to have seen those patients beforehand, is not such that you detect those minor plaque narrowings. But it's oftentimes the danger that you don't see that ends up breaking the front axle, okay? So we've become much better, if I may, at actually visualizing the heart arteries, not a stress test, Armstrong, but actually in a non-invasive way, taking pictures of the arteries, which lets us see those mild narrowings, which heretofore have escaped our attention. And the answer is risk reduction. And this is something that Armstrong Williams has, this broadcast has been, I think, a national leader in advocating the importance of risk reduction. Let me just say to our viewers,
what is the test that one needs to take to further the detection?
Well, the detection can be made with something called a coronary CTA. And this is a study that's not always available. There are tremendous physics issues that come along with taking a picture of something that's moving fast and not in a single plane. So these are the heart arteries right on top of the heart. The word coronary comes from the old Greek, it means crown. So these arteries are on top of the heart, and of course the heart is beating. So the arteries are moving. And so it's been hard to figure out how to take a picture of that. Those physics challenges have really been entirely—
And you're saying there are absolutely no symptoms at all?
Yes, Armstrong, no symptoms. No symptoms. And so what happens is you have a 40–50% plaque narrowing. You were unaware of it. The blood comes roaring down the artery. It hits that plaque narrowing. It excites the platelets to bind. The platelets bind at that moment, cause clot, and the blood then stops flowing.
So it's best to have a checkup, specifically for that.
You have to have a checkup, and you have to take these. We think that with modern technology, with knowing, Armstrong, just what we know on this Thanksgiving morning, that we could essentially eliminate the disease which today costs 1 out of 2 of us our lives. There's no other area in the endeavor, in the current practice of medicine, where we can say that. But if we just stop long enough to apply what we know, we think that vascular disease becomes like river blindness, a figment of the past.
You know, I just read this report about marijuana smoking, and people smoke marijuana like it's cotton candy, and yet the scientific community and the medical community just released a devastating report saying marijuana can lead to heart disease, strokes, heart attacks, and sudden death.
So let me just take a minute, Armstrong, in unpacking that to point out to the audience how this show takes a vanguard position. All of us hear through the media how great marijuana is to relax you, to create a sense of well-being. I'm going to remind our viewers on this Thanksgiving morning what Peter said in one of his first letters. In fact, in the first sentence, he says the following: be serious and be sober. So that's a really important thing to say. I can't overemphasize that. Be serious and be sober. So we don't favor intoxicants. I will tell you personally, I hate marijuana. And it's all another figment of we need to be responsible for ourselves. That means that when we have our hand on the helm of our craft, we're like the vigilant helmsman, always watching the horizon, keeping this craft upright. When you're intoxicated, when you're high, none of those things apply. And so, yes, it's the case that marijuana, the first thing is marijuana among young people. There is no doubt whatever, no reason for further discussion. The incidence of psychosis among young marijuana users is prohibitive. It cannot be a substance to which young people with developing brains are exposed. I want to remind our viewers this Thanksgiving morning that the brain does not become completely coherent and attached until sometime just around life's 26th year. So marijuana is never to be used in young people. What about the rest of us who are a few years older than 26? The risk of marijuana is only now getting fleshed out. Think how long people smoked cigarettes, how long doctors advertised them before we realized that this bad thing on your chest x-ray, this lung cancer, is a consequence of all of those luckies that you smoked. It took tens of thousands of human life years, as it were, in studies to make that association. So it is with marijuana. What's happening in Armstrong is the blossom is finally coming off the rose of marijuana.
You know, are we making any progress with diabetes?
You know, Armstrong, there are four, in Revelation, there's four horsemen of the apocalypse. The number one horseman of the apocalypse in human misery, number one, is diabetes.
Really?
The number one source of biological hazard is diabetes. And diabetes exists in a frank form where you're heavy and you're sure, but it also exists in an incipient form. It smolders just under the grid and you're not aware of it. I'm telling you, this is what I want our viewers this morning to clear on. Aging, biological aging, relates to insulin. Think of insulin as the fuel of the rocket ship of aging and degradation. So when you are of expanded body mass, your pancreas has to make wheelbarrows full of insulin for the peripheral tissues to respond. Armstrong, it's like talking to someone who's hard of hearing. Hi, I'm Mr. Williams. So your pancreas is kind of shouting and making amounts of insulin because the peripheral tissues, they don't want to uptake sugar. There's enough sugar as it is. And that insulin is what accelerates us in the aging process. So all of our viewers this morning, every single woman and man, I want you to remember what it was that you weighed when you were 21 years of age, or what you should have weighed when you were 21 years of age. And that's what I'd like you to weigh now. So there's no reason for us to invite the devil in. Let's do as the great poet said, remember Dylan Thomas, do not go gentle into that good night? What does it mean that we fight like the lions in winter that we are to preserve our health and expand our longevity? And we do it by, as Peter said, being serious and being sober.
When we return, Dr. Donohue and I will be joined by Dr. Thelma Reese, and the conversation is going to turn to growing old and the challenges that come along with that. Happy Thanksgiving week. I'm Armstrong Williams. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Dr. Thelma Reese is the author of The New Senior Woman, and she joins Dr. Donohue and I. Dr. Reese, what is the hardest part about aging now that you're 90 years old? 90-year-olds have never looked better. What's the hardest part for you?
The hardest part is the loss of other people, of contemporaries, of old friends, of family members. And the hardest part is getting used to that, dealing with it, feeling less a part of at least one community that you've had, which is your contemporary community.
Do you, in terms of, does it come real fast when you're at a certain age? Whether it's different when you were 70 versus 80 and now 90, and it seems more rapid?
I would say yes, Armstrong. I wrote something last year when I was turning 90. I think I sent it to you. And the title was, "Is 90 the new 80? No, it's really 90. It really turns out to be different as far as I'm concerned. I'm still very active. One of the best parts of my activity is that I'm active with some young people. I participate in a class, an intergenerational university class with psychology and neuroscience students. And I also have a couple of students who are still undergraduates who call me every week on Zoom, and we have a chat. I don't give them advice unless they ask for it. And even if they ask for it, I'm pretty circumspect about advice. I'll tell them about experience if it's relevant. But I like to listen to them and hear what they're thinking. And I like to be able to talk to them on what feels kind of like a level playing field, that we can talk about some things together and not as an old person and a young person necessarily, but as two human beings. That really is part of what keeps me going.
You know, what's fascinating is that your husband is also alive. He's older than you. What is it that frustrates you the most in the terms of the things that you realize, I just can't do this anymore? I'm old.
Yeah, and we're very lucky. We know that we're very fortunate. He's 92. I think one of the things that we're so lucky about is that we both have a real sense of humor. And we can joke even about our aging sometimes. We can joke about the things that we can't do sometimes. Sometimes it's not so funny, but we try to find the humor and we can still talk together. We're very fortunate. We recognize that.
How much of your time, when you talk about the loss of your friends and the loneliness of that, how much time do you spend thinking about your own death or the death of your husband, feeling as though it's just a matter of time?
Well, a good portion. I mean, I try to be fairly objective and think about the changes that I'm going through. Taking this course with a wonderful professor who's teaching it to the kids and to us. There's a bunch of old people in the course with them, is helpful because I get to look at this as part of life's process. I've read a lot of things myself over the years. I think about stages that one goes through that are natural, that are normal, that if you still have your mental faculties, you can kind of analyze as you go and think about the changes in a way that's almost objective. You're also very aware of close friends who are no longer really people you can keep in touch with in any meaningful way. It may mean something for them to hear your voice or to know that you're still thinking of them. I don't know, because they're no longer responsive.
You know, Dr. Donohue, at what age does your face and physical body rapidly change the most?
Well, the first thing is it's a great honor to share the dais with Thelma here. I'm very stirred by some of the things that she said. You know, the issue of aging is now itself a subject, as I know you know, Armstrong, of great thought. And it is there's really new thinking about aging, which is founded in hard molecular biology. So these aren't kind of soft aphorisms. But if you actually look at the aging process, it appears that the calculus of aging can be very much adjusted by, if you will, patient-linked features. Let me just point out a couple of things that Dr. Reese kind of brings to the fore. It is so important that we be communal organizations. Notice that Dr. Reese connects with people outside the immediate purview of her home. So she's talking about classes. She's talking about connections with friends. It turns out there's two large papers from 2014 that pointed out how the central nervous system needs to be continuously stimulated. That means new things. If you're sitting in front of the television watching reruns of Gunsmoke, you're a petri dish for cognitive decay. If you just open the front door and walk out into the sidewalk, you hear the neighbor's dog barking. You notice there's a new car as your neighbor, Mrs. Franklin, got a new car. All that information perks up the central nervous system. You notice also that Thelma is with her husband. I can't emphasize that enough. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that we do so much better if we can preserve our relationships, honor them, incubate them, and have them extend over the span of our lives, as Thelma has been able to do. And the last thought I have on this is as follows. I would like that we, Armstrong, people like you and me, make amendments in our own domain of conduct so as to populate the world in our 90s. Thelma is a treasure. She has seen, her generation has seen the world change as much as any other. So she says that she doesn't like to give the young people with whom she speaks advice, but her presence itself is a kind of homily. People look at her, I suspect, the young people look at her and think there's so much there to learn, how to conduct yourself, how to speak, what choices to make. There was a book in the background behind Thelma's left shoulder. She's reading. So we don't give up. We don't it is really important that we continue that process of honoring the body.
Let me give Dr. Reese a chance to respond. What is it that keeps you and Harvey alive? I know interviews like this is a joy for you, and we love having you in our living rooms. You're just wonderful personality and spirit.
It's an honor, too, for me to be here with you, Doctor, because I listened earlier, and I think everything you've said is so important, except one thing. Don't sit and watch Gunsmoke. Perry Mason, yes. Gunsmoke, no. So anyway, it's not just my feeling about guns, but I love Perry Mason. I've just gone through the whole 9 seasons. So it's the whole 9 years, not just seasons.
How difficult, what changed drastically for you when you turned 90 compared to 89, 88, 76? What just changed?
Yeah, Armstrong, I now know, I call it SO, seriously old. There's a difference. You know, Armstrong, I've been involved in aging well for years. I wrote some of the books. Bobby and I wrote our first book about the new senior woman when not many people were writing those books. Right. And it's not that long ago. It just has been moving so fast. This cohort has been growing so fast, thanks to all the medical advancements and all the technology. So there are more of us, and there's a whole industry about aging well, which is fascinating. So I wrote those books, and now they seem kind of passé almost, because now I'm at a new stage, and it's being old. It's not just growing old, it's being old, and that is different, and you are regarded in a different way. The one correction that I made of the wonderful Haitian American girl I speak to every week, who is pre-med, and I hope she will be a doctor because she'll be an extraordinary one. But the other day she said to me, "Oh, Thelma, I love babies. I love babies and old people because they're all so cute." And I said, "Kat, don't you dare call me cute in the way a baby is cute."
Well, listen.
She said, "How about stunning?"
Well, listen, it's a joy having you on, Dr. Reese. You know, you're one of my favorites on the planet. I've known you for what, 40 years, 30 years? It's been a very long time. I've known you since I was 2 years old. And Dr. Donohue, it's always a pleasure. When we come back, Carl Borden and Pastor Darrell Gant will join us to tell their stories during this holiday special. We'll be back.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy the same to you.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Carl Borden is a composer, producer, engineer, recording artist, spreading love and peace through music. Pastor Darrell Gant, senior pastor, Eagles Nest Church, and Stein Hospice Organization. You know, every life has a story. Dr. Gant, tell us your story and the miracle of being thankful.
Okay. Well, I just want to start off by saying on June 18th this year, on Father's Day, we were in a service. We had a guest speaker, and the praise and worship had just ended, and I was getting ready to introduce the speaker, and I stopped breathing. I said, God is good. God is good. And after the second God is good, I stopped breathing.
And you stopped breathing for how long?
I was out for over 20 minutes.
Wow.
Without a pause.
Without a pause?
Yes, without a pause. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you how good God is. We had a nurse practitioner who had that Sunday off. And prior, she had to work 7 weeks in a row. But she had that particular Sunday off. And she was there, and she began to do compressions on me. But in other words, what I'm saying is, I'm so grateful to God that God knew what was going to happen, and he had already put people in place to assist me. God is good.
What did the doctors diagnose as the problem?
Heart failure.
Wow.
Heart failure.
Heart failure.
Yeah.
Carl Borden, your story.
Well, my story, in 2018, I was trying on a shirt, and I fit the week before, but for some reason I couldn't fit it that day, and I kept trying to button it. I went to the doctor, and they said go straight to the hospital, and that's when I found out that I had kidney failure. And that was in 2018. I just had a daughter in 2016, so it was a very, very crazy time for me.
So that's fascinating. When the body shifts like that, there's a sign that something's wrong.
Yes, yeah. It came all of a sudden, and I had no idea that would be what it was. And it just makes you think about life differently.
And how did you have to adjust your diet, your physical routine as a result of that? And what has changed since that day?
Well, a lot. The one thing I was doing, I was drinking a lot of water and things like that, and that's one thing I had to change because when you're on dialysis and you're dealing with kidney failure, you have a lot of fluid restrictions because you can't get rid of all the fluid. So you have to be very strict on how much you drink, your salt intake, and different things like that. And just watching, the things I eat a whole lot closer now, and it really changes a lot of things. But it doesn't stop you, it just you have to do things differently, but you can still do them.
Pastor Gant, I'm very curious as to when you were unconscious, what you experienced during that time. There was nothing but darkness.
Yeah. Actually, in Thessalonians, where Paul talks about saints that have died in Christ, where he says, I would not have you ignorant, brethren, but them that has gone before, they are asleep. And that's exactly what it was like. As a matter of fact, when I woke up, I was in the hospital, and there were literally nothing wrong with me when it happened. I felt fine. I didn't have a cold. I didn't have any problem whatsoever. And it had happened. But absolutely, it was as if I was asleep. And when I woke up, I asked my daughter, I said, well, what am I doing in the hospital? And I said, was I here a couple of days? She said, Dad, you've been in ICU for over 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Yeah.
2 weeks?
Yeah. The doctors are amazed because they said you should be brain dead.
You know, you're a pastor, you're a man of faith, you believe in miracles, but for even you to have been in ICU for 2 weeks, how did your perspective and your further appreciation from not only from having talked about miracles as a pastor, but being a one to have received and been a part of a miracle?
Listen, Dr. Aaron, I tell you what, as I laid in the bed, I said, God, why did you bring me back? And he said, because I love you. And I said, Lord, okay. And for whatever reason, I asked him, I said, well, what do you want me to tell the people? He said, tell them what I told you. Tell them that I love them. And I said, oh my God. And so it made me realize that God has our life in his hands. You know, in the book of James, where it talks about, say not 3 months from now, we gonna do this, we gonna do that. Such boasting is wrong, but what we should say is, if the Lord will, we will do this and we will do that. That is literally, I live that way now.
How long were you in the hospital before you were released?
I was there for a month.
A month?
Yes, sir.
You know, when you were speaking in the beginning, you said 20 minutes. I assume when the nurse practitioner was there, you got up and walked away. But that is not the case.
No.
So, Carl,
Carl,
what is it like when sometimes you feel you're facing that the end is imminent, and all of a sudden you've been given a new leash on life, and you've just got to make change? Is there a part of your conscience that has changed forever? Is this a part of you? I'm not hearing him.
No.
Get him. I had an album released in 2017 called Breathe Before I Got Sick. And in 2018, when I got sick, I didn't know if I was going to be able to do music as I was before. So when I finally got myself together and came out with a new album in 2019, I called it Morning Embrace, because I wanted people to know that, you don't have a lot of, you don't know how many more mornings you have, so you need to embrace every morning that you do have. And ever since then, the music that I've done has been just a reflection of what I've been dealing with.
So true. Pastor, you got this glow, you got this fire, this enthusiasm, this zest for life about you.
Absolutely.
And how long ago was this?
Wow. Well, it was on Father's Day, June 18th.
Of this year?
Yes.
Oh my God, year?
This year.
I heard that, but it's as if you got a new purpose in life. You got a new song. You got a new walk. You got a new talk. I'm a believer too.
Well, absolutely,
yes.
Absolutely. Because number one, I told God, I said, you know what, God, we think that we in charge. We ain't in charge of nothing. God holds our very life in his hands, and every day is a gift. And so I don't worry about anything at all whatsoever, because God loves me. I don't worry about anything because God loves you. And I'm telling you, it's a lot of people need a lot of love in this world with what's going on. And that's what I appreciate about what you do for telling the truth about what's going on politically and so forth. And something Carl said, that he said he did a song, and that reminds me, I did a song also. October 1999, I did a single called Never Give Up, Don't Stop, Don't Quit. Well, I didn't realize that when I was in rehab, I was playing that song and they got a wind of it. So every morning they would come get me in rehab. They would put that song on and start singing, Never Give Up, Don't Stop, Don't Quit.
You know, I can only imagine, you know, the lives that you've impacted and brought to God and believers. Because it's one thing to talk about the gospel and to preach the gospel. It's another thing when the miracle is happening to you.
Yes,
and he gives you a new song. He gives you a new purpose, gives you a new message.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Like they said, I am so grateful, first of all, to God and to my family, which was there right with me. As a matter of fact, the church did a prayer vigil, and they said the whole city came out to pray for me. And then when I talked to Dr. Pat Bailey, she shared with me that Mother Tutu over in South Africa, they did a 24-hour vigil for me. You know, people were praying for me all over the country, and I told God, I didn't know that many people cared like that. And so what it showed me, that there's power in prayer.
You know, it's not just that. It's not just that. None of us, and Carl, you can attest to this, know what we're coming to in life, whether it's a heart attack, a stroke, a diagnosis with cancer, a car, or whatever. We never know what we're coming to, but we hope that God shows us the same grace and mercy that he showed both of us, that he gives us a chance to live again, you know, because even though all of us are dying trying to get to heaven, some people are going to say, not just yet, Lord. I want to look. Give me a few more days. Give me a few more hours. We get that, brothers. I appreciate your story at Thanksgiving. You have made my day, because there is such a thing as miracles that happen every day. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, WGLA 24/7, Dr. Donohue, Dr. Reese, and all the great people here. I'm Armstrong Williams. Happy holidays.
Thank you for having us on.
Of course, of course.